Hello, everyone. I want to talk to you guys about the savagery of Imperial Japan, specifically about cannibalism committed by Japanese soldiers. Cannibalism was actually quite common amongst Imperial Japanese soldiers, to the point where if a Japanese soldier refused to consume human flesh, that there was a chance that he could have been killed by his fellow soldiers. There was a sense of camaraderie when it came to cannibalizing the flesh of the enemy. One Japanese soldier stated that the reason why he ate the flesh of a POW was because he hated Australians, and the POW who got cannibalized was Australian. There was a sense of domination, that they were dominating their enemies by eating their flesh. There were even cases of victims being cut alive for cannibalism. Alive. They would hold the victim so that he couldn't run away. And as he was being held, they would cut the pieces of his body that they wanted to consume. And this is all happening as the victim is alive. And they say that you could hear the victim's screams. Bone-chilling, spine-chilling, horrifying, harrowing screams. Loud screams. Screams of pain and anguish. And then the screams would slowly diminish. Why? Because after they got the parts out of your body that they wanted to eat, they wouldn't kill you. No. As you were lying there, chunks of your body missing, maybe pieces of your thigh were gone, your calves were gone, your arms were gone, maybe parts of your other parts of your leg would be gone. Your legs would be gone. As you were sitting there bleeding out, they would take you and just dump you into a ditch. And you would slowly die. And they say that you could hear the screams super loud at first because you were being cut alive. You were being dismembered alive. And then the screams would slowly decline. The volume of the screaming would slowly go down because the person was now dying in a ditch, bleeding out. And this is how they would eat people in numerous cases. You were pretty much being eaten alive. And they would do this with POWs. They would cannibalize Indian POWs, Pakistani POWs, British, Australian, American POWs. There was a case where numerous American pilots were cannibalized. It's a horror. You could make a film about this, and you could call it a horror movie. So I want to read to you guys some excerpts from this book. This is a book. It's called Hidden Horrors by Professor Tanaka. And he has a whole chapter on cannibalism in the Second World War, cannibalism done by the Imperial Japanese. And I want to read to you guys some excerpts from this. So there was one story that I found quite disturbing, and it was one in which two Japanese soldiers were asked by their fellow soldiers if they wanted to have a meal with them. So these two soldiers, this happened in Papua New Guinea. These two soldiers were walking, Japanese soldiers, talking, whatever, and they saw a group of their fellow soldiers eating, and these soldiers said, "Hey, why don't you come and have a meal with us?" And these two Japanese soldiers looked at these other soldiers, and they noticed that they were smiling in this very bizarre way. It was like a sadistic smile. And they didn't like how they were smiling. There was something nefarious about the smile, and they could not trust these soldiers. Even though they were fellow Japanese soldiers, they could not trust them. And they knew that they were offering something bad, something evil. And they said, no, no thanks. Oh, but we have a good snake meat for you. Snake meat we hunted in the jungle. No thanks. And they knew what they were doing. They knew that they wanted them to participate in cannibalism because evil loves company. So these were cannibals, and they wanted to make sure that other Japanese soldiers would want to join them in their consumption of human flesh. And the person that they were eating, I'm pretty certain, was a fellow Japanese soldier. And this is another thing about cannibalism that was done by Imperial Japanese troops. Not all of the victims were POWs. They even did this thing where they would draw lots. They would draw lots, and the loser would be the one to get eaten. And there was one story that I read in which a group of Japanese soldiers drew lots, and the loser ran away because he knew that him losing meant him being eaten. So he ran away, and they hunted him down like an animal, killed him, and ate him. This is... It's so horrifying, guys. It is so horrifying. It's like a curse. It's like a curse that just... It's as if a curse had filled up the whole atmosphere in Asia. And any sort of horror that you can think of happened. Cannibalism, it happened. Mass rape, it happened. Human experimentation, it happened. There was even cases of Japanese soldiers in China taking the body parts of Chinese civilians and eating them, and they believed that by consuming the flesh of their enemy that they would get some kind of power out of it. And there were even cases of Japanese soldiers taking the private parts of Chinese male civilians and eating them, and they believed that this would give them, by eating the private parts, the penises, I'm going to be explicit with you guys here, by eating the penises of their enemies, they would receive some kind of virility. There was one case I read in which a Chinese soldier cut open a Chinese man, and he ripped, I believe, the liver from his body and ate the liver raw, and he believed that it gave him some kind of virility. It was like the demons of hell were allowed to be utterly unleashed on the earth, and the world witnessed the result of a diabolical conquest in Asia during the Second World War. So these two soldiers were walking around, and they were offered a meal by their fellow Japanese, and it turned out that this meal was a human body. And it says here, and this is a testimony from a soldier named Ogawa Shoji. This was in north central New Guinea. And he wrote, quote, "Here I saw something genuinely horrible. There was the body of a soldier lying on the track, and a large part of his thigh had been hacked off. Later, I was walking along a track with Y, and he doesn't give the name of the soldier he was with, when we were called by a group of 4 or 5 soldiers who were not in our troop. They had just finished a meal, and there was mess tins nearby. They said that they had a large cut of snake meat and invited us to join them, but we didn't like the way they were smiling as they said it. We felt that they were not telling us something. It was as if they wanted us to be partners in crime. There was something unusual about the way they were staring at us, as if they were waiting to see our reaction. Y felt the same way about the situation and said, 'No thanks, maybe some other time.' The situation was very tense. We left hurriedly, but cautiously, scared that they might try to shoot us. After we had walked a while, Y said to me, 'It's very strange. What do you think they were doing? If that had been snake meat, they would have never have given any to us. Don't you think they were trying to drag us into the crime they had committed? In fact, we saw many bodies which had their thighs hacked off.'" Now I want to read to you guys the account of a Pakistani POW who himself witnessed a man being cut alive for the purpose of cannibalism. His name was Hatam Ali, and this is what he wrote of his experience as a POW in New Guinea. "I was included in this number. We were taken to a place about 300 miles away. We were employed for 12 hours daily on hard fatigues and were given very little to eat. There was no medical treatment, and all prisoners who fell ill were immediately killed by the Japanese. Later, due to Allied attacks and activity, the Japs also ran out of rations. We prisoners were made to eat grass and leaves, and due to starvation, we even ate snakes, frogs, and other insects. At this stage, the Japanese started selecting prisoners, and every day one prisoner was taken out and killed and eaten by the Japanese. I personally saw this happen, and about 100 prisoners were eaten at this place by the Japanese. The remainder of us were taken to another spot about 50 miles away, where 10 prisoners died of sickness. At this place, the Japanese again started selecting prisoners to eat. Those selected were taken to a hut where flesh was cut from their bodies while they were alive, and they were then thrown into a ditch alive where they later died. When flesh was being cut from those selected, terrible cries and shrieks came from them and also from the ditch where they were later thrown. These cries used to gradually dim down when the unfortunate individuals were dying. We were not allowed to go near this ditch. No earth was thrown on the bodies, and the smell was terrible. And it goes without saying that this was an utter nightmare. Complete nightmare. And people are going to sit there and argue and say, well, those guys were hungry. What do you expect them to do? You can gather hunting teams to hunt for animals. The thing about these Japanese soldiers was that they had a taste for human flesh. They liked it. And there were cases, and this is for those of you who would argue and say, well, it's there were hungry. There were cases of Japanese soldiers cannibalizing people, even when they had adequate food rations. Cannibalism was done by Japanese soldiers because they had a taste for human flesh, and there was also a satanic aspect to this. There was a satanic influence in all of this, in the sense that they believed that by consuming their enemies' flesh, that they were dominating their enemies. Mr. Tanaka, he deals with this sort of argument, and he says, how is it possible that such extreme behavior manifested itself at such an early stage, especially when the supply of rations to the Japanese soldiers was adequate, if not plentiful? And he says, these are clearly not cases of cannibalism brought on by starvation. So he goes on to say, the act of eating a slain enemy had a heroic aspect to it, the spoils of victory. In fact, one Japanese soldier who was tried after the war for cannibalism of an Australian soldier testified that he ate the human flesh because he hated Australian enemies. He also says, there could be some cases in which Japanese soldiers who refused to participate in the group cannibalism committed by their squad or company became victims of this crime themselves because they were seen as potential traitors to the group's solidarity and discipline. So he says that there could have been cases of Japanese soldiers who did not want to consume human flesh, and so as punishment for their refusal, they would be cannibalized themselves. And this reflects the story that I recounted earlier, in which you had two Japanese soldiers who did not want to consume human flesh. They rejected the offer of their fellow Japanese soldiers to have a meal with them because they knew that this meal was a human body. Endogenous cannibalism, in which Japanese soldiers consumed their fallen comrades, probably served to reaffirm group solidarity, to create a bond between the living and the dead within the group. So there you have it. Satanic savagery manifested as cannibalism. You could call it psychosis. You could call it madness. I call it satanic influence and really satanic inspiration manifesting itself in such a horrific act. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.